Good evening and welcome. Close your eyes and let the modern world drift away, replaced by the cool, rhythmic pulse of the ancient Nile. Tonight, we aren't just telling stories, we are stepping into a time when the sky was a goddess named Nut, arching her star-speckled body over the earth to protect us while we sleep. Imagine the scent of blue lotus and the sound of papyrus reeds whispering in a midnight breeze. As the sun god Ra begins his quiet journey through the stars, let his golden bark carry you into the deep, healing silence of the first time. You are safe, you are held, and the gods of Egypt are watching over your rest. Before the first sunrise, before the concept of a yesterday or a tomorrow, there was only the vastness of none. It was not a place, but a state of being, an infinite, shoreless ocean of primordial water that stretched into a void without end. These waters were dark, heavy, and silent, holding the weight of a universe that had not yet been spoken into existence. None was the embodiment of chaos, yet it was not a malevolent force. It was the father of the gods, a cosmic soup containing the seeds of every star, every grain of sand, and every living breath. Within this abyss, there was no heat, no cold, no movement, and no sound. Only the potential for all things lay suspended in the deep. The stillness of none was absolute. There were no currents in this sea, for there was no wind to stir them. There was no light to illuminate the depths, for fire had not been conceived. It was a dark, liquid womb, a limitless expanse of non-existence that nonetheless hummed with the dormant power of creation. In this state of non-being, the universe was a dream without a dreamer. Everything that would one day become the Nile, the mountains of the south, and the great green sea was currently nothing more than a flicker of possibility hidden in the murky waves of the abyss. This was the era of the old ones, the hidden potential of the void. Within this dark water, 4 pairs of deities, the octoag, represented the qualities of the chaos. There were Nun and Nonet for the water itself, Heh and Hauhet for infinity, Kek and Kauket for the darkness, and Amun and Amunet for the hiddenness. They were the silent architects of the vacuum, waiting for a catalyst. This catalyst would not come from the outside, for there was no outside to speak of. Instead, the stillness began to vibrate with a subtle internal pressure. The infinite potential of the water started to condense, pulling itself toward a singular point of focus. Chaos was beginning to tire of its lack of form. The silence of none was not empty, it was pregnant. It was the heavy silence that precedes a great storm, or the breath held in the moment before a word is spoken. The hidden one within the water began to stir, a consciousness emerging from the unconsciousness of the deep. This emergence was the first defiance of the void. In a realm where nothing had a name began to form. In a realm where nothing had a shape, a shadow began to solidify. The chaotic waters resisted this pull toward order, yet they were the very source from which the order was drawing its strength. We call this moment the first time,
or Zep Tepi. It was the threshold between the eternal nothingness and the beginning of the story. The waters of none did not vanish, they simply receded to the edges of the universe, forever circling the world we know, waiting for the moment when order might fail. Finally, the tension reached its breaking point. The surface of the dark water trembled, ripples spreading across an ocean that had been flat for an eternity. A single spark of divine will ignited in the center of the abyss, and the universe prepared to witness the arrival of the first mind.
From the swirling center of the primordial waters, a divine consciousness finally fully awakened. This was Atum, the complete one, the god who created himself by calling his own name. He was the first individual, the bridge between the infinite chaos of none and the finite reality of the world to come. Atum found himself floating in the dark, and with a single thought of absolute power, he willed himself to have a place to stand. In response to his command, the waters parted, and a singular pyramid-shaped mound of earth rose toward the void. This was the Benben stone, the first solid ground in existence. Standing upon the Benben, Atum looked out into the darkness and found it lacking. He was the All-Father, yet he had nothing to father. He was the king of the world, but his kingdom was a single rock surrounded by a black sea. He realized that to be the all, he must bring forth more than himself. With a deep breath that shook the foundations of the abyss, Atum shed the first light. This was not the sun as we know it, but a pure radiance that emanated from his divine skin, cutting through the shadows of Kek and Kauket. The era of absolute darkness was over. The first day had begun. Atum was a god of immense complexity, containing within himself both the masculine and the feminine principles of creation. He did not need a mate to begin the lineage of the gods. He was the source and the vessel, the seed and the soil. He stood on the mound, a golden figure against the receding blackness. The Benben stone beneath his feet was more than just earth. It was the concentrated essence of life. It was the prototype for every temple and every pyramid that would ever be built in Egypt, a physical manifestation of the transition from the fluid chaos of the water to the stable order of the land. As Atum looked at his reflection in the still waters around the mound, he felt the first stirrings of desire, the desire to see his own thoughts take form. He began to speak, and his words were not merely sounds, they were the blueprints of reality. Every syllable he uttered carved a new law into the fabric of the universe. He was the great he-she, a being of self-sufficiency who began to sweat with the effort of creation. From his divine essence, the heat of the world began to manifest. The coldness of none was pushed back by the warmth of Atum's presence, creating a pocket of life in the frozen void. The All-Father knew that the Benben was only the beginning. He looked at the vast horizon and envisioned a world of complexity, of movement, and of life. He knew that for this to happen, he would have to divide his own perfection into smaller, more specialized parts. Atum's arrival marked the end of the primordial silence. By existing, by standing, and by seeing, he had set the gears of time into motion. The first time was now a record of progress,
and the Creator prepared to take the most difficult step, the generation of the first pair of separate gods.
Atum stood alone upon the Ben-Ben stone, surrounded by the golden light of his own creation. But the loneliness of the void weighed heavily upon his spirit. He realized that a universe with only one witness was no universe at all. He needed others to see the light, to feel the air, and to continue the work of building reality. Through a sacred and mysterious act of self-generation, Atum concentrated his divine energy into his very throat. He took the moisture within himself and the air he breathed, and with a thunderous effort he spat forth a new deity. This was Shu, the god of dry air and the personification of the wind. Immediately following Shu, Atum exhaled a second time, and from his breath came Tefnut, the goddess of moisture and rain. She was the cool dew of the morning and the heavy mist of the river. Together, Shu and Tefnut were the first couple, the first instance of duality in a world that had only known the singularity of Atum. As Shu and Tefnut emerged, the environment around the Ben-Ben stone began to change. For the first time, there was a breeze, the very presence of Shu moving across the waters. For the first time, there was a dampness in the air that was not the overwhelming flood of Nun, but the gentle humidity of Tefnut. These two deities represented the first separation of the elements. Before them, there was no distinction between the dry and the wet, the gas and the liquid. By their birth, Atum had created the atmosphere, the fundamental space required for life to eventually take root and flourish. Shu and Tefnut were not just elements, they were the guardians of order. Shu was the principle of stability and dryness, while Tefnut was the principle of change and life-giving water. They were the two lungs of the world, ensuring that the void of Nun remained pushed back by the pressure of the air. However, shortly after their birth, Shu and Tefnut became lost in the vast, dark reaches of the primordial ocean. They drifted away from the Ben-Ben stone, exploring the edges of the new world. Atum, fearing he had lost his children to the chaos of Nun, grew anxious and sent his Eye to find them. The Eye of Ra, a powerful solar deity in its own right, detached from Atum and went on a journey into the dark. It searched the depths of the abyss for what felt like an eternity, eventually finding the two young gods and guiding them back to the safety of the primordial mound and their father's light. When they returned, Atum wept with such profound joy that his tears fell upon the fertile soil of the Ben-Ben stone. From these divine tears, the first humans were born, springing from the soil as a byproduct of a god's love and relief. Humanity was thus linked to the gods by the very essence of emotion. The world was now populated by the All-Father, the air, and the moisture. The foundation was laid, but the structure of the universe was still incomplete. Shu and Tefnut, united by their shared origin, began to look toward one another, and their union would soon bring forth the very stage upon which history would unfold. From the union of Shu, the air, and Tefnut, the moisture, two great beings were born who would define the physical boundaries of the Egyptian universe. These were Geb, the god of the rocky earth, and Nut, the goddess of the star-speckled sky. They were the grandchildren of Atum,
and their birth brought a new scale to creation. Geb was the personification of the land. His body was the mountains, his ribs were the valleys, and his skin was the fertile silt of the Nile. He was the foundation, the solid reality upon which all things would rest. He was often depicted with green skin, symbolizing the vegetation that would eventually sprout from his back. Nut was his counterpart, the vast, overarching canopy of the heavens. Her body was a map of the constellations, and her skin was the deep blue of the evening sky. She was the Great Mother who protected the world, stretching from horizon to horizon, her hands and feet touching the four corners of the earth. Geb and Nut loved each other with an intensity that surpassed any bond the universe had yet seen. They were inseparable, locked in a perpetual, intimate embrace. In their love, there was no gap between the earth and the sky. Nut lay directly upon Geb, her belly pressing against his mountains. While their love was beautiful, it created a dire problem for the fledgling universe. Because they were so tightly entwined, there was no space between them for anything else to exist. The air could not circulate, the light of Atom could not reach the ground, and the creatures born from Atom's tears had nowhere to walk. The world was in a state of suffocating darkness. The potential for life was being crushed by the very weight of the sky. The plants could not grow because there was no room for their stalks to rise, and the sun could not sail across the heavens because there was no path for it to follow. Atom watched this from the Ben stone and realized that his grandchildren's love, while pure, was obstructive to the great plan. The universe required Mat, balance and order. If the earth and sky remained one, the cycle of life and death, of day and night, could never truly begin. Nut was also pregnant with a new generation of gods, but because she was pressed so tightly against Geb, she had no room to labor. The children within her were trapped, unable to enter the world. The lineage of the gods was at a standstill, caught in the eternal embrace of the earth and the heavens. The situation called for a drastic intervention. Atom summoned Shu, the father of the two lovers, and gave him a difficult command. Shu, the god of the wind and the air, was tasked with breaking the embrace of his children to create the necessary void in which the world could function. This was the first great sacrifice in mythology, the separation of a perfect union for the sake of the many. Geb and Nut wept at the thought of being torn apart, but the law of Atom was absolute. The space between the earth and the sky had to be cleared, or the universe would remain a stillborn dream.
Shu, the god of the air, stepped between his two children, Geb and Nut. With a voice like a rushing gale and the strength of the desert winds, he prepared to fulfill Atom's command. He placed his massive hands beneath the belly of Nut, and his feet firmly upon the chest of Geb, and he began to push. With a roar that echoed through the primordial waters, Shu thrust his arms upward. Nut was lifted high into the air, her body arcing in a magnificent curve over the world. Geb, meanwhile, was pinned to the ground, his body stretching out to form the flat plains and rugged hills of the Egyptian landscape. The separation was violent and agonizing for the lovers. As Nut was pushed higher, her fingers and toes remained touching the ground at the cardinal points,
but her torso was held aloft by the tireless arms of her father. This created the atmosphere, the great open space that we call the sky. This act created the bubble of our world. For the first time, there was a horizon. For the first time, there was a below and an above. Shu became the eternal pillar, the unseen force that prevents the sky from falling and crushing the earth back into the chaos of the beginning. With the sky held high, the light of autumn, which would eventually become the sun god Ra, finally had a path to travel. The sun could now rise in the east, sail across the belly of Nut during the day, and set in the west, where it would travel through the hidden regions of the night. The space created by Shu allowed the first winds to blow and the first rains to fall. The moisture of Tefnut could now descend from the clouds to the soil of Geb, allowing the first seeds of life to germinate. The world became a dynamic, moving system rather than a static, frozen embrace. Geb, however, was devastated. In his grief at being separated from his wife, he thrashed upon the ground, his movements creating the jagged peaks of the mountains and the deep rifts of the canyons. His tears flowed into the low places, creating the rivers and the lakes that would nourish the land. Nut, looking down from her high arch, became the guardian of the stars. Every evening the sun would enter her mouth, and every morning she would give birth to it once again. She became the clock of the universe, her body marking the passage of time through the cycles of the moon and the constellations. This act created the fundamental architecture of the Egyptian world. It defined the limits of human existence and the domain of the gods. It taught that growth often requires distance and that the order of the universe is maintained by the constant effort of the divine. Though they were forever apart, Geb and Nut remained connected through the air of their father. Every time a storm rages or the wind whispers through the palms, it is said to be the voices of the earth and sky reaching out to one another across the vast expanse that Shu continues to hold open.
The separation of Geb and Nut had created the space for life, but it also triggered the first great conflict of divine law. Nut was pregnant with 5 children, the fruit of her union with Geb, but the sun god Ra, who had risen to supreme power, looked upon her swelling womb with deep suspicion. He feared that these new gods, born of earth and sky, would possess a power that might one day eclipse his own golden throne. In a fit of divine jealousy, Ra issued a terrible decree that vibrated through the very fabric of Ma'at. He cursed Nut, declaring that she should not be able to give birth on any day of any month of the year. In those ancient times, the calendar consisted of exactly 12 months of 30 days each, totaling 360 days, and Ra's curse sealed every single one of them against her. Nut was overwhelmed by the weight of her unborn children and the cruelty of the sun god's law. She could feel the new god stirring within her, yearning to be born into the light, yet the calendar was a prison of time that offered no escape. In her desperation, she turned to the wisest mind in the cosmos, Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and magic. Thoth, whose mind was as sharp as a scribe's reed and as deep as the primordial waters, listened to the Queen of the Sky. He knew that Ra's word was law and could not be broken directly,
But he also knew that the universe thrived on balance and cleverness. He began to devise a plan that would use the celestial bodies themselves to bypass the curse. Thoth approached Khonsu, the moon god, whose light was nearly as brilliant as the sun's in those early days. He challenged the moon to a game of Senate, the game of passing. The stakes were high. Thoth was not playing for gold or power, but for a portion of the moon's own light, the very essence of lunar time. The game lasted for what seemed like ages as the two gods moved their pieces across the board of fate. Thoth, the master of logic, outmaneuvered the moon at every turn. Piece by piece, he won a 72nd part of the moon's light, a fraction so small it seemed insignificant to Khonsu, yet so potent when gathered together. When the game concluded, Thoth took the light he had won and fashioned it into 5 brand new days. These days were special. They were epagamenal, meaning they belonged to no month and were tied to no year. They existed in the gaps between the old year and the new, a sacred pocket of time that fell outside of Ra's original decree. Because these 5 days did not exist when Ra spoke his curse, they were free of his magic. Nut finally found the window she needed. On each of these 5 days she labored with joy, bringing forth the 5 great deities who would shape the destiny of Egypt: Osiris, Horus the Elder, Set, Isis, and Nephthys. The birth of these children changed the universe forever. To accommodate the new days, the calendar expanded to 365 days, but the moon, having lost its light to Thoth, was forced to wane and grow thin every month as it tried to recover its strength. This was the origin of the lunar phases, a permanent scar from Thoth's clever gamble. Ra was furious when he discovered how he had been outwitted, but even he could not undo what the god of wisdom had woven. The children of Nut were now part of the world, and the stage was set for the great kingdom. The 5 days became a time of both celebration and fear, marking the transition from the rule of the primordial gods to the reign of the royal siblings.
On the first of the 5 miraculous days, Osiris was born. Legend says that at the moment of his arrival, a great voice rang out across the entire earth, echoing through the canyons and over the marshes, crying, "The Lord of all has come forth into the light." It was a declaration of hope, for Osiris was the embodiment of the fertile earth and the promise of life. As he grew, Osiris did not display the fiery temper of Ra or the cold distance of autumn. Instead, he possessed a quiet, magnetic dignity. He was tall, with skin the color of the rich black silt left behind by the flooding Nile, symbolizing his deep connection to the soil and the cycles of growth that would eventually sustain humanity. When Osiris ascended to the throne of Egypt as its first king, he found the human race in a state of primitive chaos. Men and women lived like wild animals, fighting over scraps of meat and huddling in caves against the dark. There were no laws, no harvests, and no prayers. The potential of humanity was being wasted in the struggle for survival. Osiris began his reign by traveling the land, not with an army of spears, but with the power of persuasion and song. He taught the people how to recognize the seeds of wheat and barley, showing them how to plow the earth and channel the waters of the Nile into their fields.
Under his guidance, the first green shoots of civilization began to poke through the mud. He did not stop at agriculture. Osiris was a lawgiver who understood that bread alone could not build a nation. He established the first codes of justice, teaching men that might does not make right. He introduced the concepts of marriage, property, and the sacredness of the family, binding the wandering tribes into a unified society. To ensure that the soul was as nourished as the body, Osiris taught the people how to honor the gods. He showed them how to build shrines and perform the rituals that kept the universe in balance. He was the great king who bridged the gap between the divine and the mortal, making the world a place where both could coexist. His presence was like a cooling rain upon a parched land. Wherever he walked, flowers bloomed in his footsteps, and the desert receded before the advancing tide of green. He became known as the good being, the god who cared for the lowliest peasant as much as the highest priest, and his name became a synonym for peace. Under his rule, the golden age of Egypt began. There was no war, for there was enough for everyone. There was no hunger, for the granaries were always full. The Nile itself seemed to love Osiris, rising and falling with a perfect regularity that ensured the prosperity of the land year after year.
By the side of Osiris stood his sister and wife, Isis, the most powerful sorceress in the history of the gods. If Osiris was the body of the state, Isis was its soul and its intellect. While her husband focused on the outward works of kingship and agriculture, Isis turned her attention to the inner mysteries of life and the empowerment of the people. Isis was the great mother, but she was also a teacher of practical arts. She sat with the women of Egypt, showing them how to grind grain between two stones to make flour, how to spin the fibers of the flax plant into thread, and how to weave that thread into the white linen that would define Egyptian dress for centuries. Her magic was not a thing of vanity or destruction, but of healing and protection. She knew the secret names of the spirits and the medicinal properties of every herb that grew along the riverbanks. She taught the first physicians how to bind wounds and cure fevers, weaving spells into the bandages to ensure the body healed in harmony with the spirit. Isis was also the architect of the first social bonds. She introduced the sacredness of the marriage vow, teaching that the union between man and woman was a reflection of the divine union between earth and sky. She protected the hearth and the home, ensuring that the children of Egypt grew up in a world of stability and love. Perhaps her greatest gift was the gift of language and magic. Isis understood that words have the power to create and destroy. She taught the people the importance of the spoken word in prayer and the written word in record-keeping, laying the foundation for the wisdom that would later be recorded in the sacred scrolls. She was a queen of immense beauty, but her true power lay in her throne of the mind. She could see the threads of fate as they were being woven, and she often advised Osiris on matters of state. Together they formed a perfect duality, the king who provided the grain and the queen who provided the wisdom to use it. Isis was also a master of disguise and a guardian of the vulnerable. She often walked among the people incognito, checking to see if the laws of Osiris were being upheld and if the poor were being treated with dignity. She was the eye and ear of the throne,
ensuring that justice was not just a decree, but a reality in every village. Her devotion to Osiris was legendary, a love so strong it would eventually challenge the boundaries of death itself. She sensed the growing darkness in their brother Set long before Osiris did, and she tried to warn her husband that the desert sands were beginning to creep toward the fertile valley. Despite her power, Isis remained humble and accessible. She was the goddess who wept with the mourning and rejoiced with the newlywed. Her name, which means throne, signified that the power of the pharaoh actually resided in the lap of the goddess, that the king only ruled by the grace of the mother principle. As the Golden Age reached its height, Isis remained the vigilant protector of Maat. She was the one who kept the magical barriers strong, holding back the chaotic forces that sought to undo her husband's work. But even the greatest of sorceresses could not prevent the tragedy that was written in the stars, a tragedy that would test her wisdom to its absolute limit.
While the valley of the Nile flourished under Osiris, the red land of the desert remained the domain of Set. Set was the god of the wasteland, the searing sun, and the violent storm. He was a creature of raw, untamed power, often depicted with the head of an unknown beast, a composite of the jackal, the aardvark, and the nightmare. In the beginning, Set had been a defender of Ra, standing at the prow of the solar bark to strike down the serpent of chaos. He was a warrior by nature, built for conflict and survival in the harshest environments. But as the world grew more peaceful under Osiris, Set began to feel that his own strength was being made obsolete. Set looked at the green fields of the Nile with a deep, burning resentment. To him, the vegetation was a cancer that was slowly choking the purity of his deserts. He saw the laughter of the people and the songs of the harvesters as insults to the majestic, terrifying silence of the sandstorms he commanded. His envy was not just of the land, but of the love Osiris commanded. Set felt that he was the stronger brother, the one who truly understood the harsh realities of the universe. He believed that the people were being made soft by Osiris's kindness, and that Egypt needed a ruler who governed with the iron fist of a storm god. The contrast between the brothers was absolute. Osiris was the cool, refreshing water. Set was the fire that turned it to steam. Osiris was the predictable cycle of the seasons. Set was the sudden disaster that broke the pattern. This friction created a spiritual heat that began to warp the peace of the Golden Age. Set's heart became a forge where he hammered out a dark plan. He knew he could not defeat Osiris in an open, fair fight, for the king was protected by the love of the people and the magic of Isis. He realized that to steal the throne, he would have to use the one weapon Osiris did not understand: treachery. He began to gather a secret band of 72 conspirators, other lesser gods and spirits who also felt sidelined by the era of peace. They met in the depths of the desert, where the wind hid their voices, and they began to craft a plot that would use Osiris's own noble nature against him. Set also invited Aso, the queen of Ethiopia, to join his cabal. Together, they studied the king from afar. Set realized that Osiris had a weakness. He was so incapable of malice
that he could not imagine it in others. Osiris believed that because he loved his brother must surely love him in return. To execute his plan, Set commissioned a magnificent chest made of the finest cedar wood and encased in beaten gold and silver. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, decorated with scenes of the gods and inlaid with lapis lazuli. It was, in truth, a sarcophagus, but Set presented it as a gift of beauty and brotherhood. The shadow of the desert was now reaching for the throne. The air in the palace grew heavy and charged with the static of an approaching storm. Set was ready to strike, and his goal was not just to kill a man, but to end the Golden Age and return the world to a state where only the strong and the ruthless could survive.
The trap was set at a grand banquet hosted by Set, ostensibly to celebrate the prosperity of his brother's reign. The hall was filled with music, wine, and laughter, but the air was thick with the hidden tension of the 72 conspirators. Osiris, unsuspecting and joyful, arrived with Isis at his side, though she felt a cold dread in the pit of her stomach. At the height of the festivities, Set had the magnificent cedar chest brought into the center of the hall. The guests gasped at its beauty. Set announced with a wide, deceptive smile that he would give this priceless treasure to anyone who could lie down inside it and fit its dimensions exactly. One by one, the conspirators tried to lie in the chest. Some were too tall, others too short, and some too broad. They laughed and joked, making light of their failure, all according to Set's rehearsal. Finally, as if by chance, they called upon the king himself to try his luck, knowing that Set had secretly measured Osiris's shadow to build the box. Osiris, ever the good sport and charmed by the craftsmanship, stepped into the chest. As he lay down, his body fit the contours of the cedar perfectly, as if he had been carved from the wood himself. He smiled up at his brother, but the smile was met with a face that had suddenly turned into a mask of pure, cold hatred. Before Osiris could move, Set's conspirators surged forward. They slammed the heavy lid shut with a thunderous bang that silenced the music in the hall. While some held the lid down, others raced to pour molten lead around the seams, sealing the king in a vacuum of metal and wood from which there was no escape. The banquet hall erupted into chaos. The music turned to screams of horror as Set and his men hoisted the heavy chest onto their shoulders. They carried it out of the palace and through the darkened streets, heading for the Tanaitic mouth of the Nile, where the current was the strongest and the deepest. With a final mocking laugh, Set ordered the chest to be cast into the river. It hit the water with a heavy splash and was immediately seized by the dark, churning waters. It sank for a moment, then bobbed to the surface, being carried away by the current toward the great green sea, leaving a trail of lead and gold in its wake. Osiris, the king of Egypt, was gone. He was neither dead nor alive, but trapped in a golden prison, drifting away from the land he had civilized. The breath of the world seemed to catch in its throat, and for the first time in centuries, the Nile did not sparkle with light, but reflected the dark, bruised color of the night sky. Set immediately declared himself the king of Egypt, taking the crown by force and surrounding himself with his desert warriors. The Golden Age ended in a single night.
The laws of Osiris were burned, the temples were repurposed to honor the storm god, and a reign of terror and fear began to settle over the valley like a layer of choking dust. Isis, however, was not captured. In the confusion and grief, she slipped away into the shadows, her heart broken, but her resolve hardening into something stronger than stone. The quest for Osiris had begun, and the desert god would soon learn that while he could steal a throne, he could never truly kill the hope that his brother had planted in the soil of Egypt.
When the news of the betrayal reached the ears of Isis, she did not collapse in a fit of divine despair. Instead, she performed the ancient rites of mourning. She cut a long lock of her sapphire hair, donned the tattered, somber robes of a commoner, and set out on foot. Her throne was gone, her husband was vanished, and the kingdom was under the iron boot of Set. Yet she walked with the steady purpose of a hunter. She followed the riverbank, asking the reeds, the crocodiles, and even the wandering winds if they had seen a chest of cedar and gold. Most were too terrified of Set's storms to answer, but the children of the Nile, the young boys playing by the water, had seen the glint of gold drifting toward the sea. Isis blessed them with the gift of prophecy, decreeing that children would forever after speak the truth that adults were too afraid to whisper. The chest had drifted far beyond the borders of Egypt, crossing the great green sea to the shores of Phoenicia in the city of Byblos. There the waves had pushed the sarcophagus into the roots of a young tamarisk tree. Sensing the divine presence of the king within, the tree grew with supernatural speed, its trunk thickening and expanding until it completely encased the chest within its fragrant wood. The king of Byblos, marveling at the sudden majesty of the giant tree, ordered it cut down to serve as the central pillar for his new palace. He had no idea that the very heart of his home now held the body of a god. Back in Egypt, Isis sensed the location through her magic and took ship for Byblos, arriving not as a goddess, but as a humble nursemaid. She sat by the public well of the city, emitting a divine fragrance from her skin that captivated the queen's handmaidens. When they returned to the palace, they carried the scent of heaven with them, and the queen of Byblos, intrigued, summoned the mysterious stranger to care for her infant son. Isis accepted, seeing her path to the pillar that held her husband's remains. Every night, while the palace slept, Isis transformed into a swallow and flew circles around the tamarisk pillar, chirping a mournful lament that vibrated through the stone floors. To make the queen's son immortal, she placed him in the hearth fire to burn away his mortality. But the queen, discovering the scene, screamed in terror and broke the spell, forever denying her son eternal life. Revealing her true, radiant form, Isis demanded the pillar. The king and queen, trembling before the goddess of magic, surrendered the wood. With a single touch, Isis split the trunk of the tamarisk, revealing the cedar chest. It was scarred by the sea and stained by the sap of the tree, but it remained sealed, holding the silent Osiris within its leaden grip. Isis draped the wood in fine linen and anointed it with myrrh, leaving a portion of the tree to be worshipped by the people of Byblos as a sacred relic. She then had the heavy chest loaded onto a ship, beginning the long journey back to the delta. The sea grew calm in her presence, and the stars seemed to lean down to guide her home way. Upon reaching the hidden marshy fringes of Egypt, Isis hid the chest among the thickest papyrus reeds of the delta.
She knew that Set's spies were everywhere, watching the roads and the river for any sign of her return. She needed time to gather her magic, to find a way to breathe the spirit back into the clay of her husband's body. She knelt by the chest in the moonlight, her hands trembling as she touched the cold gold. She was the queen of Egypt, yet she was alone in a swamp, a fugitive in her own land. But as she looked at the silent chest, she felt a flicker of heat from within. The king was not gone. He was merely waiting for the voice that could call him back from the shadows.
The peace of the Delta was short-lived. Set, who could never truly rest while he knew his brother's body existed, spent his nights hunting by the light of the full moon. He rode a chariot of storm clouds, his eyes scanning the earth for any ripple in the Ma'at. Fate, cruel and shifting, led him to the very thicket where Isis had concealed the cedar chest. Finding the chest, Set let out a roar that shook the stars. He did not merely want Osiris dead, he wanted him erased from the memory of the earth. With the strength of 100 desert gales, he smashed the lid of the chest. He looked down at the peaceful face of his brother, and in a frenzy of demonic jealousy, drew a blade made of black flint. Set hacked the body of Osiris into 14 pieces, one for each day of the waning moon. He did not bury them, he scattered them across the length and breadth of the kingdom. He threw one piece into the marshes, another into the deep Nile, another into the desert sands, and others to the distant mountains of the south, laughing as he watched the good being become a fragmented memory. "Now," Set cried to the night, "let the widow search for a king who is scattered like dust. Let the people pray to a god who has no heart and no hands." He believed he had finally won, for a body so broken could never be restored, even by the greatest sorcery. He returned to his throne, confident that the reign of Osiris was truly buried in the mud. When Isis returned to the thicket and found only the empty, broken chest and the blood-stained reeds, her shriek tore through the fabric of the world. It was a sound so full of agony that the birds of the marsh stopped their singing, and the fish hid in the depths. Her husband had been stolen a second time, and this time he was not even a whole man. Isis did not surrender to the madness of grief. She sent word to her sister Nephthys, the wife of Set, who had long lamented her husband's cruelty. Nephthys, representing the dark and hidden aspects of the earth, fled from Set's palace to join Isis in the marshes. Together, the two sisters vowed to find every fragment of their brother, no matter how far they had to travel. The search was an epic journey through the geography of Egypt. Every time they found a piece, a hand in Memphis, a foot in Abydos, the torso in Busiris, they built a shrine over the spot. This was the origin of the many sacred cities of Egypt. Each was founded on a piece of the divine king, turning the entire land into a living map of Osiris. They traveled by boat, by foot, and by the wings of birds. They enlisted the help of the local spirits and the simple farmers who risked Set's wrath to point the way toward the missing limbs. Piece by piece, the good being was gathered back together.
the fragments of his divinity calling out to one another across the miles. However, when they reached the 14th piece, the phallus, the source of life and generation, it had fallen into the Nile and been swallowed by the Oxyrhynchus fish. This was the ultimate tragedy, for without the power to create, Osiris could never truly be a king of the living again. Isis, undeterred, fashioned a replacement out of pure, consecrated gold. She laid all the pieces on a bed of linen, fitting them together like a divine puzzle. The body was broken, scarred, and incomplete, but it was together. Now she needed a way to bind these pieces into a form that could withstand the passage of eternity.
To solve the problem of the broken body, Isis summoned a god who had been watching from the shadows of the necropolis, Anubis, the jackal-headed son of Nephthys. Anubis was the master of the secret house, the god who understood the chemistry of decay and the preservation of the spirit. Together, they prepared to perform a ritual that had never before been seen in the universe. Anubis began by cleansing the 14 pieces in the sacred waters of the Nile. He treated the skin with natron salts to dry the moisture of death, and anointed the flesh with cedar oil and liquid resins brought from the mountains of the north. He spoke to the cells of the body, commanding them to stop their return to the earth and to hold their form forever. Then Anubis took long strips of the finest white linen, soaked in aromatic gums. With the precision of a weaver, he began to bind the pieces of Osiris together. He wrapped the feet, then the legs, then the golden torso, moving upward until only the face remained. Each wrap was accompanied by a spell, turning the cloth into a protective armor of magic. This was the birth of the first mummy. By binding the body, Anubis was not just preserving meat and bone, he was creating a Sa, a divine vessel that could house the soul, even if the heart had stopped beating. He was inventing the art of embalming, a gift that would allow every Egyptian to follow in the footsteps of their king. While Anubis worked on the physical form, Isis and Nephthys stood at the head and foot of the bier. They took the form of kites, small birds of prey with piercing cries. They flapped their wings over the body, the movement of the air representing the breath of life. They wailed the first dirge, a song of such power that it vibrated the very atoms of the room. Isis used her words of power to call back the Ka, the life force, and the Ba, the soul of Osiris. She negotiated with the spirits of the underworld, demanding that they release the king's essence so he could speak one last time. The air in the room grew thick with the scent of incense and the static of high sorcery. As the final wrap was placed over the head of Osiris, Anubis stepped back. The body was no longer a collection of broken parts. It was a singular, shimmering white figure, a statuesque monument to the man who had been king. It was beautiful and terrible, a silent inhabitant of the borderland between the light and the dark. But the body was still cold. The ritual had preserved the form, but it had not yet ignited the spark. Isis knew that for her husband to truly live again, she would have to perform an act of magic that required her to give a portion of her own life force to the silent mummy. She leaned over the wrapped face of Osiris, her wings still beating. She pressed her lips to the linen and breathed into him. In that moment, the room was filled with a blinding green light.
the color of the new grass and the rising Nile. The first mummy stirred, a tremor running through the ancient cedar oil and the linen bands. Osiris opened his eyes. They did not see the world of the living. They saw through the walls, through the earth, and into the infinite depths of the Duat. He was awake, but he was changed. He was no longer the king of the Nile. He had become the king of eternity, the lord of the silent land. In that brief, miraculous window of resurrection, Osiris was suspended between worlds. He could not stay among the living, for his body had been rendered and his blood had stopped flowing. But he had enough strength to fulfill one final, vital purpose. Isis, seeing the light in his eyes, knew that the future of Egypt depended on what happened in the next few heartbeats. Transforming again into a bird of light, Isis hovered over her husband. Through a mystery that the priests would whisper for generations, she drew the essence of Osiris into herself. Even in death, the king was fertile. Even in his silence, he was a creator. In this union of the winged goddess and the mummified god, the seed of the future was planted. Horus, the child of the sun, was conceived in that moment. He was the avenger of his father, the one who would eventually rise to challenge Set and reclaim the throne. He was the promise that the Golden Age was not dead, but merely sleeping, waiting to be reborn in the heart of a new king. As the light of the conception faded, the strength left Osiris. His eyes closed once more, and he settled back into the stillness of the tomb. He had done what was required. He had provided the heir who would restore Ma'at. He turned his gaze away from the sun and toward the west, the direction of the setting sun and the land of the ancestors. Osiris descended into the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. He did not go as a prisoner, but as a conqueror. Because he had been mummified and justified, he became the judge of all who would come after him. He sat on a throne of lapis lazuli, surrounded by the 42 judges, becoming the beacon of hope for every soul who feared the dark. Isis was left in the marshes, her womb now holding the hope of the world. She felt the first stirrings of Horus within her, and she knew that her struggle was far from over. If Set learned that Osiris had left an heir, he would tear apart every reed in the delta to find and destroy the child before he could take his first breath. She retreated deeper into the swamps, to a place called Chemis. The island was said to float upon the waters, hidden by the mists and protected by the dense thickets of papyrus. Here, the goddess of magic became a woman of the marshes, living in secret and silence as she waited for the time of her labor. She was not entirely alone. The 7 scorpions of Serkek followed her, acting as her bodyguard and stinging any of Set's spies who drew too near. The local spirits of the Nile, the fish, the birds, and the river gods all conspired to keep her location a secret, weaving a veil of invisibility around the sacred island. The moon waxed and waned 9 times as Isis waited. She spent her days listening to the heartbeat of the prince within her, and her nights looking at the stars, communicating with the spirit of Osiris in the underworld. The bond between the living and the dead was now a bridge of blood and bone. Finally, under the light of a star that had never before been seen, the labor began. Isis, the queen of heaven, gave birth on a bed of reeds to a son with the eyes of a hawk. Horus was born into a world of shadow, but his first cry was a challenge to the usurper on the throne. The war for the soul of Egypt had entered its second, more dangerous phase.
The infant Horus was born into a world of constant peril. He did not have a palace of stone, but a nest of reeds. He did not have 1,000 servants, but a mother who had to hunt for fish and roots to sustain them both. Yet, even in his infancy, the divinity of the hawk god was evident. His eyes held the light of the sun and the moon. Set was not foolish. He felt a shift in the cosmic balance at the moment of Horus's birth. He knew that Isis had escaped him, and he suspected that she carried a weapon he could not fight with a sword. He sent out his seekers, poisonous serpents, rabid jackals, and dark spirits of the wind, to find the child in the marshes. One day, while Isis was away gathering food, a scorpion sent by Set found the hidden cradle. It struck the infant prince, injecting a venom meant to kill a god. When Isis returned, she found Horus cold and stiff, his breath shallow, and his skin pale. Her scream of grief was so loud that it reached the solar bark of Ra as it sailed through the sky. The sun god Ra, moved by the plight of the widow and the heir, ordered his boat to stop. This was a catastrophic event. Time itself stood still as the sun paused in the heavens. Thoth, the god of wisdom, descended from the boat to the marshes of Chemis, carrying with him the greatest magic of the heavens. Thoth examined the child and spoke to Isis with the voice of a calm teacher. He reminded her that Horus was the son of Osiris, and that his destiny was written in the stars. He could not die while the throne was still held by a usurper. Thoth began to recite a spell of such complexity that it drew the venom out of the child's veins and into the ground. As the poison left him, Horus took a great gasping breath. The color returned to his face, and his eyes opened with a new, fierce intelligence. He had tasted death and returned from it, just as his father had. From that day on, he was not just a child, he was the protector of the land, a being who could overcome any poison. Isis realized then that she had to be more than a mother. She had to be a mentor. She taught Horus the secret names of the elements. She showed him how to listen to the whispers of the river and how to read the patterns of the stars. She filled his mind with the stories of his father's justice and his uncle's treachery. Horus grew with supernatural speed. He spent his youth wrestling with the crocodiles and racing the desert winds that Set sent to torment him. He became a master of the spear and the bow, but he also learned the value of patience. He knew that to strike at Set, he would need more than just muscle. He would need the backing of the gods. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, the ghost of Osiris would rise from the mists of the marsh. He would speak to his son, not in words, but in visions of the underworld. He showed Horus that kingship was a burden of Ma'at, a responsibility to keep the world in balance, even at the cost of one's own peace. The marshes of Chemis became a training ground for a king. By the time Horus reached his maturity, he was no longer a fugitive hiding in the reeds. He was a warrior god, his wings vast enough to shadow the land,
his gaze fixed on the northern horizon where Set's palace stood. The time of hiding was over. The time of the Avenger had come.
When Horus finally reached the fullness of his strength, he did not simply attack Set with a sword. He attacked him with the law. He traveled to the island in the mist, where the great Ennead, the council of the 9 supreme gods, sat in judgment. Standing before Ra, Thoth, and the ancient spirits of creation, the hawk god demanded that the crown of his father, Osiris, be returned to its rightful heir. The council was immediately divided, throwing the cosmos into a diplomatic crisis. Shu and Thoth argued passionately for Horus, claiming that the son must always inherit from the father to maintain the natural order of Ma'at. However, Ra, the sun god and head of the council, hesitated. He favored Set's raw, chaotic strength, fearing that the young Horus was too inexperienced to defend the solar bark from the serpent of darkness. Set, sensing Ra's doubt, erupted in a fury of desert sand and thunder. He mocked Horus as a child of the marshes and challenged any god who supported the boy to a duel. The courtroom of the gods became a place of shouting and cosmic tension as the 80-year legal battle began, a struggle not just of bloodlines, but of the very philosophy of how a kingdom should be ruled. To break the stalemate, the goddess Isis used her cunning to trick the council. She knew that as long as Set was present, his intimidation would sway the weaker gods. She convinced the divine ferryman to take her to the island despite Set's ban, disguising herself as a beautiful mortal woman in distress. When Set saw her, he was captivated by her beauty and forgot his royal dignity. Disguised, Isis told Set a hypothetical story. She claimed to be the widow of a shepherd whose cattle had been stolen by a stranger, leaving her son with nothing. Set, trying to impress the beautiful woman, declared loudly that the stranger should be beaten and the cattle returned to the son. Isis immediately dropped her disguise and cried out, "You have judged yourself, Set. You are the stranger, and Horus is the son." The gods cheered at the cleverness of Isis, and even Ra was forced to admit that Set had condemned his own actions. But Set was not a god who accepted defeat through logic. He turned his rage upon the council, declaring that he would only relinquish the throne if Horus could defeat him in a series of physical trials that would test the very limits of their divine essence. The first of these trials was a test of endurance and transformation. Set challenged Horus to descend into the deep waters of the Nile, where they would both take the form of giant, silver-skinned hippopotami. The rule was simple. Whoever could remain submerged beneath the surface for 3 full months would be declared the victor and the rightful king of Egypt. As they dove into the dark, silt-heavy waters, Isis watched from the shore with a heavy heart. She knew that Set was a master of the deep and the storm, and she feared for her son's lungs. In her desperation to help, she fashioned a magical harpoon and cast it into the water, hoping to strike Set and force him to the surface to breathe. However, her aim was shaken by her emotions. The first time she threw the harpoon, it struck Horus by mistake. The young god roared in pain, surfacing and accusing his mother of betrayal. Horrified, Isis withdrew the weapon and struck again, this time piercing Set. But when Set cried out to her,
calling her sister and pleading for mercy, her heart softened, and she released him. Horus, enraged that his mother had shown mercy to his enemy, leapt from the water in a fit of Set-like fury. In his madness, he tore the crown from his mother's head and fled into the desert mountains. The tribunal was shocked. The good son had acted with the violence of a usurper, and the gods began to wonder if Horus was truly any better than the uncle he sought to replace.
Horus hid in the desolate, sun-scorched peaks of the desert, his mind clouded by the trauma of the combat and his anger at Isis. While he slept in the shadow of a high cliff, Set tracked him down. Set did not come with a spear. He came with the silent cruelty of a desert predator. He fell upon the sleeping Horus and, with his jagged fingernails, gouged out both of the young god's eyes. Set buried the eyes in the sand of the mountainside, where they grew into lotus flowers that bloomed in the moonlight. He left Horus blind and broken in the wilderness, returning to the Ennead to boast that the prince of the Delta was now a sightless beggar who could never rule a kingdom he could not see. It was the darkest hour for the followers of Osiris, as chaos seemed to have finally blinded the light of justice. The goddess Hathor, the lady of turquoise and love, found Horus wandering the desert. She took pity on the wounded prince and caught a wild gazelle, milking it into a golden bowl. She washed the empty sockets of Horus's face with the divine milk, whispering ancient spells of restoration. Through her grace, the eyes began to reform, but they were no longer merely human eyes. They had become celestial bodies. One eye became the sun, representing the power of the day and the strength of the pharaoh. The other became the moon, representing the magic of the night and the cycles of the afterlife. Horus could see again, and his vision was now sharper than any hawk's, capable of seeing through the hearts of men and the shadows of the underworld. He returned to the gods, a being of renewed and terrifying radiance. Set, realizing that physical violence had failed to stop Horus, turned to a more insidious form of warfare, the corruption of the soul. He invited Horus to his palace under the guise of a truce, offering a feast of reconciliation. Set's plan was to humiliate Horus sexually, to prove that the younger god was subordinate and therefore unfit for the masculine role of the king. During the night, Set attempted to pass his essence on to Horus, but the young god was vigilant. Under the secret guidance of his mother, Isis, Horus caught Set's seed in his hand. He ran to Isis, who was horrified by the violation. She used her magic to cut off Horus's hand and throw it into the marsh, instantly growing him a new, clean hand to ensure he remained untainted. Isis then devised a brilliant counterplot. She went to Set's garden and found his favorite food, a bed of crisp green lettuce. She placed Horus's own seed upon the leaves. When Set sat down to eat the following day, he unknowingly consumed the essence of his rival, thinking he had won the psychological war, while he was actually being infiltrated by the very power he sought to suppress. When the two appeared before the Ennead once more, Set boasted that he had dominated Horus and that the boy carried his mark. The gods looked on with disgust, but Thoth, the god of wisdom, called out for the seed of the gods to reveal themselves. To Set's absolute horror, his own seed emerged from the depths of the marsh, while Horus's seed emerged as a golden sun disk from Set's own forehead. The Ennead erupted in laughter and mockery. Set had been publicly shamed and outwitted at his own game. The golden disc on his head served as a crown for Horus, worn by his enemy. Set roared with a sound like a collapsing mountain, his face turning the color of the red desert as he realized that the child was now a master of the very trickery Set had used to kill Osiris. The legal battle had reached a fever pitch, but Ra still hesitated to give the final verdict. He demanded one final, definitive trial, a contest that would prove which god possessed the superior intellect and the favor of the elements. Set, desperate to reclaim his dignity, proposed a race that he believed his strength would guarantee he would win.
Set's final challenge was a race of ships, but with a condition that defied the laws of nature. The boats had to be made of solid stone. Set believed that his raw power as a storm god would allow him to propel even a mountain across the water, while the smaller, slighter Horus would surely sink into the mud of the Nile. It was to be a test of sheer divine force against the gravity of the earth. Set went to the mountains of the south and hewed a massive block of white granite. He spent days carving it with lightning bolts and desert winds, shaping a vessel that weighed as much as a temple. He was confident that his stone ship was a testament to his status as a god of the enduring, unyielding desert. He dragged the monstrosity to the riverbank, the earth groaning beneath its weight. Horus, meanwhile, went to the forest. He cut down a great cedar tree and carved a swift, elegant boat. But he did not leave it as wood. Drawing on the lessons of his mother, he covered the entire hull in a thick layer of white plaster and limestone dust. To the eye of any observer, including the gods of the Ennead, Horus had built a boat of solid white stone. On the day of the race, the banks of the Nile were crowded with the spirits of the dead and the gods of the living. Set climbed into his granite ship, laughing at the frail vessel of Horus. But the moment Set's boat hit the water, the laws of physics asserted themselves. The granite ship did not sail. It plummeted like a fallen star, sinking instantly into the deep silt of the riverbed. Set's rage was so great that he transformed into a hippopotamus and attempted to capsize Horus's boat from below. He thrashed in the water, creating whirlpools and waves that threatened to drown the spectators. But as he struck the hull of Horus's ship, the plaster shattered, revealing the buoyant, flexible cedar wood beneath. Horus sailed on, steady and true, mocking the uncle who relied on weight instead of wisdom. Horus stood at the prow of his wooden ship and aimed his harpoon at the thrashing Set. He could have ended the war then with a single strike to the heart, but the voice of the Ennead rang out, commanding him to stay his hand. The trial was over, and the deception had been revealed. Horus had proven that a king must be like wood, strong yet flexible, capable of floating atop the chaos rather than being buried by it. Despite the humiliation of the race, Set refused to yield. He fled to the desert and gathered his red warriors, threatening to plunge Egypt into an eternal civil war. He argued that even if Horus was clever, he lacked the great secret of the kingdom, the ability to make the crops grow and the souls of men endure. He claimed that Osiris was dead, and a dead king could offer no wisdom to a living heir. It was Thoth who suggested the final solution. He knew that there was one witness whose testimony no god, not even Ra, could ignore. Thoth sent a divine messenger, a hawk made of shadow, into the depths of the Duat, the underworld. he sent a letter to Osiris, asking the Lord of the Silence to judge the conflict between his brother and his son. The messenger traveled through the 12 gates of the night, past the lake of fire and the serpent of darkness, until he reached the throne of Osiris. The mummified king sat in the hall of truth, his skin green as the new grain, his eyes seeing the past and the future at once. He read the letter from the living gods and took up his scribe's reed to write a reply. The letter that returned from the underworld was written in a script that bled like the juice of a crushed grape. It did not contain pleas or arguments, it contained a warning. Osiris reminded the gods that he was the master of the grain and the vines. He reminded them that every god, every human, and even the sun itself must eventually pass through his kingdom to be judged.
The letter from Osiris was read aloud in the court of Ra. "Why is my son Horus being cheated of his throne?" the message began. "Am I not the one who gave the world the gift of barley and wheat? Is it not my power that feeds the gods and the cattle? Without me, the fields would turn to dust, and the gods themselves would wither in their palaces of gold." Osiris then delivered the ultimate threat. "I have under my command a host of messengers with the faces of hounds and the teeth of lions. They fear no god and obey only my word. If justice is not done for Horus, I shall send my army of the dead into the land of the living, and the hearts of the gods will be brought to me for weighing before their time." The Ennead fell into a terrified silence. They realized that while they ruled the sky and the earth, Osiris ruled the forever. He held the keys to their immortality. If the king of the dead withdrew his favor, the world would become a barren wasteland where life had no meaning and death had no hope. Ra finally lowered his scepter, his resistance broken by the cold reality of the underworld. Ra summoned Set and Horus to stand before him for the final time. He looked at Set, the god of the storm, and said, "You are a great warrior, and your strength is needed to protect my boat from the serpent Apep. But you are not a king. A king must nourish, and you only destroy. You must leave the throne of the valley and return to the red sands of the desert." Set bowed his head, his roar reduced to a low, disgruntled rumble. He was not destroyed, for chaos is a necessary part of the world, but he was contained. He was given the task of howling in the wind and guarding the borders, a lonely god of the periphery, while the fertile center of the world was returned to the line of Osiris. Then Ra turned to Horus. He took the double crown, the white crown of the south and the red crown of the north, and placed it upon the hawk god's head. "You are the avenger of your father," Ra declared. "You are the pharaoh of the living. Through you, the green of Osiris and the light of the sun are joined forever." The coronation of Horus was a moment of cosmic realignment. The contendings were over, and the 80 years of struggle were washed away by a sudden, joyous overflow of the Nile. The people of Egypt, who had suffered under Set's erratic storms, came out of their homes to see the sun shining on a river that was rising to feed their fields once more. Horus ascended the throne in the city of Memphis, the White Walls. He sat upon a seat of electrum, wearing the crook and the flail of his father. Beside him stood Isis, her quest finally complete, and Thoth, who recorded the event in the scrolls of eternity.
The Golden Age was not just restored, it was reinforced by the fire of trial. But Horus knew that his reign was a heavy burden. He was now the living god, the bridge between the human and the divine. He had to ensure that the balance of Ma'at was maintained every single day, for he knew that the forces of chaos were never truly gone. They were merely waiting for the scale to tip. As the new king looked out over his people, he felt the gaze of his father from the underworld. Osiris was the roots of the tree, and Horus was the branches. Together they formed the great cycle of the Egyptian soul. But as the world settled into peace, a new mystery began to emerge, the mystery of how a mortal man could follow the path of these gods into the afterlife.
With Horus on the throne, the concept of Ma'at, the divine harmony of truth, justice, and order, became the law of the land. It was no longer a theoretical idea. It was the rhythm of the rising sun and the flooding river. Every action the pharaoh took was designed to keep the world from sliding back into the dark, chaotic waters of Nun. Ma'at was personified as a goddess wearing a single ostrich feather on her head. She was the one who weighed the words of the king and the actions of the people. Under Horus, the temples were rebuilt, and the priests were taught the correct rituals to feed the gods. The Egyptians believed that if Ma'at was not upheld, the stars would fall, and the Nile would dry up forever. This was the era when the Great Pyramids were first envisioned, not just as tombs, but as ascension machines that would link the earth to the stars. The pharaohs who followed Horus sought to build monuments that mirrored the Ben stone, the first mound of creation, ensuring that their names would live for millions of years. Horus established the bureaucracy of wisdom. He appointed Thoth as his vizier, ensuring that every harvest was measured, every tax was fair, and every dispute was settled with logic. The wild, lawless days of Set were replaced by a society of scribes and architects, a civilization that valued the enduring over the violent. The king also established the sacred festivals. He created the Opet festival, where the gods would travel in golden barks along the river, visiting the people and renewing the fertility of the soil. The land of Egypt became a mirror of the sky, with every city corresponding to a constellation and every temple reflecting a divine mystery. Isis remained the Queen Mother, the hidden power behind the throne. She taught the people the magic of the Hekau, the words of power that could protect children from scorpions and heal the sick. She was the one who ensured that the divine feminine was never forgotten in a world of kings and warriors. Set, in his banishment, became the lord of foreign lands. The Egyptians respected him as the god who protected them from outside invaders and who tested their strength. He was the necessary friction that kept the engine of the world turning. Without the desert of Set, the valley of Horus would have no boundaries and no definition. As the centuries passed, the line of Horus became the longest-running dynasty in history. Each pharaoh took the name Horus at their coronation, believing that the spirit of the hawk god inhabited their body. They were the lords of the two lands, the shepherds who guided humanity through the dangers of the physical world. But even the greatest pharaoh was mortal. Horus himself, after a reign of hundreds of years, eventually felt the call of his father, Osiris.
He realized that his work on Earth was done, and that he had to prepare for the final transition, the journey from the world of light to the world of the Westerners. This transition became the focal point of the Egyptian religion. How does a soul navigate the 12 hours of the night? How does a heart survive the scales of judgment? The story of the gods now shifted from the creation of the world to the salvation of the soul, a journey that every human, from king to peasant, would eventually have to take.
With the contendings resolved, a new era of divine kingship solidified the foundation of Egypt. Horus did not rule as a distant tyrant. He ruled as the living God, the physical manifestation of heavenly order on earth. To the people of the Nile, the pharaoh was the Ka, or soul of the nation, a bridge between the mundane world of the harvest and the eternal world of the stars. When the pharaoh spoke, it was with the authority of the hawk. When he walked, the very soil of Geb felt the weight of a creator. The coronation of Horus established the double crown, the psent, which combined the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt into a single unified symbol of power. This was not merely a piece of jewelry, but a magical battery that pulsed with the protective energy of the cobra goddess Wadjet and the vulture goddess Nekbet. To wear the crown was to take on the burden of the two lands, a responsibility to ensure that the north and south remained in a state of perfect, tensioned harmony. Horus established the first royal court, a mirror of the Ennead he had faced in the island of the Midst. He appointed followers of Horus, semi-divine spirits and wise men, who traveled the land to ensure the irrigation canals were clear and the grain stores were guarded against famine. The king was the good shepherd, his crook representing his role as a guide for his people, and his flail representing his power to punish those who disrupted the peace of Ma'at. Every year, during the season of Akhet, when the Nile began to rise, the pharaoh would perform a sacred rite to open the river. It was believed that the king's own life force stimulated the floodwaters, drawing the green essence of his father Osiris out of the mud. The prosperity of the people was tied directly to the health of the king. If the pharaoh was strong and just, the land was fertile. If the pharaoh was weak, the desert of Set would begin to reclaim the fields. Isis, the queen mother, remained at the heart of the palace as the great sorceress. She taught her son that a king is only as strong as his secret knowledge. She revealed to him the true names of the spirits that dwell in the wind and the water, allowing Horus to command the elements. The palace was not just a home, but a fortress of high magic, where the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual were thin and shimmering. Under the reign of Horus, the first royal temples were constructed using the geometry of the gods. These were not mere buildings, they were houses of eternity, built to trap the divine essence of the stars on earth. The pillars were carved to look like papyrus and lotus stalks, turning the interior of the temples into a stone version of the primordial marsh where Horus had been hidden as a child. This was also the time when the cult of the ancestors began. Horus taught that while he was the living king, he was constantly supported by the spirits of the justified kings who had ruled before him. The past was never truly gone in Egypt. It was a reservoir of wisdom that the living Horus could tap into through prayer and ritual. The dead were not gone, they were simply Westerners watching over their descendants. The hawk god also established the laws of trade and diplomacy.
He sent ships to the land of Punt for incense and to the mountains of Lebanon for cedar, expanding the horizons of his people. Egypt became the center of the world, a lighthouse of civilization in a sea of wandering tribes. The Pax Haryana brought a level of art and architecture that the world had never seen, as men worked not out of fear, but out of a shared belief in their divine king. Yet Horus knew that even he was subject to the cycles of time. He watched the sun rise and set every day, and he realized that the true mystery of power lay in the journey of Ra across the sky. He began to study the Book of the Heavenly Cow, learning how the sun god managed the universe. He realized that the day was only half the story. The true test of a god and a king happened in the 12 hours of the night. As Horus aged, his hair turned to lapis lazuli and his bones to silver, just as the legend said of the ancient gods. He prepared his people for the day he would depart, promising that his spirit would inhabit every future pharaoh. The line of Horus was born, a chain of kings that would stretch for 3,000 years, each one a link in the golden cord that bound the earth to the throne of Osiris.
To understand the universe of Horus, one must understand the journey of Ra, the sun god. Every morning, at the moment of dawn, Ra is born as the scarab Khepri, pushing the sun disk over the eastern horizon. He boards his morning boat, the Monjet, accompanied by a powerful crew of deities, Thoth for wisdom, Mot for direction, and Sia for perception. This vessel is known as the Bark of Millions of Years, for it has sailed since the first time and will sail until the end of all things. As the sun climbs toward the zenith, Ra transforms into his midday form, a radiant king of fire. From his throne on the boat, he gazes down upon the two lands, his light acting as a judge of all human actions. Nothing can be hidden from the eye of Ra. He sees the thief in the market, the priest in the temple, and the pharaoh on his throne. His heat is both a blessing that ripens the grain and a curse that can wither the rebellious. The journey across the sky is not a passive drift. It is a regal procession. The stars of the day, hidden by the sun's brilliance, act as his outriders. The spirits of the eastern bow sing hymns of praise to wake the world, while the winds of Shu provide the breath needed to fill the celestial sails. For the Egyptians, the blue sky was actually a heavenly Nile, a mirror of the river below, upon which the gods traveled in eternal motion. As the afternoon wanes, Ra begins to age. His golden skin takes on a reddish hue, and he becomes Atum, the Aged One. The sun disk hangs low in the west, casting long purple shadows across the desert. This is the hour of the entry, when the boat prepares to leave the world of the living and descend into the Amenti, the land of the west. The atmosphere grows heavy with anticipation, for the safety of the world depends on what happens after the sun disappears. At the moment of sunset, the sky goddess Nut leans down and swallows the sun disk. To the mortal eye, the world grows dark, but in the divine realm, the bark has merely switched rivers. Ra enters the Mesektet, the evening boat, and begins the most dangerous part of his cycle, the 12 hours of the night in the Duat. The sun is no longer a bright disk, it is a flesh or corpse of light, protected by the coils of the serpent Mehen. The Duat is a realm of inverted reality.
Here, the rivers flow backward, and the inhabitants walk on their heads. It is a place of monstrous trials and gates guarded by demons with names like He Who Dances in Blood or the Fire Breather. To pass through each hour, Ra and his crew must know the secret names of the gatekeepers and provide the correct words of power to keep the path open. The crew of the night boat is a warrior elite. Set, the god of the storm, stands at the prow, his spear ready to strike. Isis uses her magic to weave veils of protection around the vessel, while Thoth keeps the ledger of time, ensuring that the boat does not stay too long in any 1 hour. Even the souls of the justified dead climb aboard to help row, for if the sunboat stalls, time itself will stop, and the universe will collapse into the void. In the depths of the night, Ra undergoes a mystical union. In the 6th hour, the darkest point of the journey, the Ba, the soul of Ra, meets the body of Osiris. They merge into a single supreme entity, the United One. This union is the engine of the universe. It recharges the sun with the regenerative power of the underworld and gives the dead the hope of a new dawn. It is the moment where life and death become one. The journey through the night is also a journey through the judgment of history. In each hour, Ra visits the spirits of the deceased, bringing them a brief hour of light and cool water. He judges the enemies of Mot, casting them into pits of fire, while rewarding the followers of Horus with eternal provisions. The sun's passage is a nightly reenactment of justice, purging the world of the dross of the previous day. As the 12th hour approaches, the boat nears the eastern horizon once more. The tension reaches its peak as the gods prepare for the final confrontation with the forces of chaos. The coming forth by day is not guaranteed. It is a victory that must be won every night through courage, magic, and the unwavering will of the sun god. Only when the first ray of light pierces the dawn can the world breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that the cycle of life has been preserved for another day.
Deep within the darkest cavern of the Duat dwells the ultimate enemy of existence, Apep, or Apophis. Apep is not a god. He is a demon of non-existence, a massive serpent of chaos whose coils are as wide as the Nile and whose skin is the color of bruised night. He is the personification of everything that existed before the first mound rose from Nun, and his only desire is to swallow the sun and return the universe to a state of silent, dark, watery void. Apep does not have eyes. He sees through the vibrations of the solar bark as it moves through the underworld. He lies in wait at the sandbank of the serpent, where the celestial river grows shallow and difficult to navigate. As the boat of Ra approaches, Apep lets out a roar that is not a sound, but a psychic vibration that can paralyze the hearts of even the bravest gods, filling their minds with the heaviness of despair. The serpent uses the gaze of the abyss to hypnotize the crew. He tries to drink the river, swallowing the celestial waters so that the solar bark will run aground, leaving Ra vulnerable to his fangs. If Apep succeeds, the sun will never rise, the dead will never wake, and the stars will fall from the body of Nut. He is the entropy of the Egyptian soul, the constant pressure of chaos against the fragile shell of order. But Ra is not without his champion. Paradoxically, the god who stands at the very front of the boat to face the serpent is Set.
Despite his past crimes against Osiris, Set is the only deity with a heart of iron strong enough to resist the hypnotic gaze of Apep. While the other gods might tremble, Set roars back at the serpent, his voice a thunderclap that shatters the silence of the abyss. Set wields a massive spear of electrum, a metal that conducts the power of the sun. As the serpent lunges for the boat, Set strikes, piercing the thick, scaly hide of the demon. The struggle is cosmic. The quakes felt in the world above are often said to be the tremors of this nightly battle. Set's role in the solar boat is his path to redemption, the way he uses his violent nature to serve the greater good of Ma'at. Isis also plays a crucial role in the defeat of the serpent. She uses her Hekau, words of power, to bind the coils of Apep, weaving invisible nets of magic that restrict his movement. She creates illusions that confuse the serpent's senses, making the boat appear as a flock of birds or a cloud of mist. Without the magic of the goddess, the brute strength of Set would eventually fail against the infinite persistence of chaos. The battle is a nightly ritual of unmaking. The gods don't just kill Apep, they dismember him. They cut his coils into pieces and burn them in the fires of the underworld. Yet, because Apep is a force of primordial chaos, he can never truly die. He is healed by the darkness of the following day, growing back his coils and his malice, ready to face the boat again in the next cycle. This eternal struggle explains the solar eclipse. When the sun briefly vanishes during the day, the Egyptians believed that Apep had momentarily gained the upper hand, partially swallowing the boat before the gods could drive him back. During these times, the entire nation would join in a rite of overthrowing Apep, shouting and clashing cymbals to help the sun god in his fight. The victory over Apep is the victory of becoming over nothingness. It teaches that order is not a permanent state, but a result of constant active effort. The sun rises not because it is its nature, but because the gods and the justified dead have fought a war to make it happen. Every dawn is a hard-won triumph of the light. As the boat passes the defeated serpent and heads toward the gates of the morning, Ra is transformed. The old man of the sunset is shed like a skin, and the child of the dawn begins to glow within the belly of the sky goddess. The serpent is left behind in the dark, hissing his promise to return, while the bark of millions of years prepares to burst through the eastern mountains and bathe the world in gold once more.
There was a time, long after the creation, but before the current age of men, when Ra ruled the earth as a physical king. During this era, the first golden age, the sun did not stay in the sky. Ra lived in a palace of gold in the city of Heliopolis. But as the centuries turned into millennia, Ra began to age. His golden skin became wrinkled, his bones turned to silver, and his divine saliva fell to the earth as common moisture. Humans, seeing the frailty of the aged sun god, began to lose their fear and their respect. In the dark corners of the marketplaces and the remote villages of the desert, they began to plot a rebellion. They claimed that Ra was too old to rule, that his laws were dusty, and that humanity should seize the fire of the sun for themselves. They stopped bringing offerings to the temples and began to speak evil words against the Creator. Ra, whose ears could hear the heartbeat of a fish in the deep Nile, sensed the treason. He was saddened rather than angry,
for he had fashioned humanity from his own tears. He summoned the secret council of the gods, Nun, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, and the Eye, to meet in his palace. He asked for their advice. Should I destroy the creatures I have made, or is there a way to bring them back to the path of Ma'at? The primordial god Nun, the father of the waters, spoke first. He advised Ra to stay upon his throne, but to send his eye down to earth in its most terrifying form. The eye of Ra was not just an organ of sight. It was a separate goddess, the daughter of the sun, who acted as his protector and his weapon of destruction. None argued that only a demonstration of absolute power could save the universe from the chaos of human rebellion. Ra agreed. He summoned his daughter, the beautiful and graceful Hathor, and transformed her. He took away her sistrum and her songs of love, and he gave her the heart of a predator and the roar of a lioness. She became Sekhmet, the powerful one, the lady of flame. Her skin turned the color of the red desert, and her eyes burned with the cold light of a dying star. Sekhmet descended upon the earth like a falling mountain of fire. She did not negotiate, she hunted. She began in the deserts where the leaders of the rebellion had fled, and she tore through their ranks with claws of obsidian. The sand of the Red Land was soon soaked in the blood of the rebels, and the lioness found that she possessed a thirst that no water could quench. The slaughter did not stay in the desert. Sekhmet, driven by a divine bloodlust that had grown beyond Ra's original command, moved into the fertile valley. She fell upon the cities and the farms, killing the innocent along with the guilty. The Nile itself began to run red, and the air was filled with the scent of copper and charred wood. Humanity was on the brink of total extinction. Ra looked down from his palace and was horrified. He had wanted to punish the rebels, not erase his creation. He called out to Sekhmet to stop, but the lioness was deaf to his voice. She was the one before whom evil trembles, and in her madness she saw all of humanity as evil. She promised that on the next morning she would finish her work and drink the last drop of human blood. The gods realized they could not stop Sekhmet by force, for she possessed the concentrated power of the sun's own eye. They had to use Sia, perception, and cunning. Ra ordered his messengers to travel to the island of Elephantine and bring back vast quantities of red ochre and mandrake root. He summoned the brewers of the palace and commanded them to work through the night, preparing a lake of beer. They brewed 7,000 jars of strong barley beer and mixed it with the red ochre until it was the exact color and consistency of fresh human blood. Under the cover of darkness, they transported the jars to the fields where Sekhmet intended to begin her final slaughter. They poured the beer onto the ground until the entire plain was covered in a red, shimmering flood, 3 spans deep.
When the first rays of dawn touched the earth, Sekhmet rose from her sleep, her mane matted with the gore of the previous day. She looked out over the fields and saw what appeared to be a vast sea of blood. Believing that the gods had already performed the slaughter for her, she let out a cry of triumph and ran into the red flood. She did not wait. She began to lap up the liquid with a terrifying hunger. Because it was beer,
and not blood, she drank greedily, her thirst fueled by the heat of the morning sun. The alcohol, infused with the soothing properties of the mandrake, began to work its magic on the divine lioness. Her limbs grew heavy, her vision blurred, and the fire in her eyes began to fade into a soft, golden glow. Sekhmet tried to roar, but the sound turned into a satisfied purr. She began to sway in the red pool, her predatory instincts drowning in the haze of the beer. Finally, she collapsed into a deep, dreamless sleep in the middle of the field. Ra descended from the sky and placed his hand upon her head, drawing the Sekhmet nature back into the depths of her soul. When she finally awoke, the lioness was gone. In her place stood the gentle Hathor, her skin golden and her heart full of love once more. She looked at her blood-stained paws and wept, but Ra comforted her, telling her that she had saved the world from itself. To commemorate this day, Ra decreed that every year a festival of drunkenness would be held, where the people would drink red-dyed beer to celebrate their survival. This near extinction changed the relationship between gods and men forever. Humans realized that their existence was a gift that could be revoked, and they returned to the temples with a new somber devotion. They understood that Maat was not just a law, but a shield that protected them from the eye of their own creator. The rebellion ended, and a period of deep, fearful peace settled over the land. However, Ra also realized that he could no longer stay on Earth. The smell of humanity had become bitter to him, and he longed for the purity of the celestial heights. He decided to leave the physical throne of Egypt to his son and grandson, withdrawing into the sky. He climbed onto the back of the sky goddess Nut, who had transformed into a giant celestial cow.
When Ra withdrew into the sky, the world was left in a state of intellectual darkness. Men had the fire of the sun, but they did not have the light of record. It was then that Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, stepped forward to become the bridge between the divine mind and human understanding. He was the heart of Ra and the tongue of Atum, the deity who understood that for a civilization to endure, it must be able to trap its thoughts in a form that outlives the flesh. Thoth stood upon the banks of the Nile and observed the patterns of the stars, the movements of the river, and the growth of the papyrus reeds. He realized that the universe was written in a mathematical code of harmony. To give this code to humanity, he invented the Medu Neter, the words of the gods, which we know as hieroglyphs. These were not merely letters, they were magical icons that held the actual essence of the objects they depicted. To write the word lion was to summon the strength of the beast into the stone. He did not merely give men the alphabet, he gave them the tools of measurement. Thoth invented the reed pen, the palette of ink, and the scrolls of papyrus. He taught the first scribes how to calculate the rising of the Nile and how to map the constellations of the imperishable stars. Because of Thoth, time was no longer a chaotic blur. It became a calendar of seasons, months, and hours, allowing the farmers to know exactly when to plant and when to harvest. Thoth was also the master of magic, but his magic was the magic of the right word. He knew that a spell was only as powerful as its pronunciation.
he recorded the Book of Thoth, a legendary volume said to contain the secrets of the gods and the power to command the elements. He hid this knowledge in the temples, entrusting it only to those whose hearts were balanced by Ma'at, for he knew that knowledge without character was the path to the desert of Set. As the moon god, Thoth took up the silver disk and placed it upon his head to light the world when Ra was in the underworld. He became the substitute of the sun, ensuring that the darkness never fully reclaimed the earth. He measured the phases of the moon, creating the first lunar cycles, and became the patron of all who sought the truth in the silence of the night. Scribes would offer a drop of water to Thoth before they began their work, acknowledging that their wisdom was merely a reflection of his. He was the divine diplomat who settled the disputes between the gods. When Horus and Set reached a stalemate, it was Thoth's logic that provided the solution. He understood that the universe required both the hawk and the storm, but that they must be governed by the scale of truth. He became the clerk of the heavenly court, the one who recorded the deeds of every living soul in the great ledger of life, to be read at the end of time. Thoth also gave humanity the gift of medicine and architecture. He whispered the proportions of the golden ratio into the ears of the master builders, allowing them to construct temples that resonated with the frequency of the heavens. He taught the physicians how to balance the humors of the body, treating the spirit as carefully as the wound. Under his guidance, Egypt became a land of the scribes, where the mind was as respected as the sword. However, Thoth's greatest contribution was the concept of the lasting name. He taught that as long as a person's name was written and spoken, they would never truly die. This belief fueled the entire Egyptian obsession with monuments and inscriptions. To carve one's name in granite was to hitch one's soul to the wagon of eternity, a tradition that turned the Nile Valley into a vast open-air library of stone. He remained the most mysterious of the gods, a being who existed in the library of the void. He was often seen accompanied by the baboon, a creature that screams at the rising sun, symbolizing the soul's desire to greet the light of wisdom. Thoth knew that the words he gave to men would eventually be used to judge them, for the scrolls he wrote in life would be the very evidence presented in the Hall of Truth. As the era of the gods drew to a close, Thoth stood as the guardian of the transition. He prepared the Book of the Dead, the spells for coming forth by day, to act as a guidebook for the soul. He knew that the journey after death was a labyrinth of riddles, and he provided the answers in advance. For Thoth, the ultimate goal was not power, but the justified soul that could stand before Osiris without fear.
When a person's finally left their body, they became a Westerner, a traveler on the most perilous road in existence. The death of the body was not an end, but a second birth into the Duat. The soul, divided into parts, the Ka, life force, the Ba, personality, and the Ak, intellect, had to reunite and navigate the 12 regions of the night, following the wake of the solar bark of Ra. The journey began with the opening of the mouth ceremony, where the priests used a sacred adze to touch the face of the mummy, magically restoring the soul's ability to speak, eat, and see in the afterlife. Without this ritual, the deceased would be a shadow ghost, wandering the tomb in a deaf and dumb stupor. Once the mouth was opened, the soul stepped out of the sarcophagus and into the shifting twilight landscape of the underworld.
The Duat was a landscape of memory and trial. The traveler had to cross rivers of fire and mountains of glass, all while being pursued by soul-eaters and monsters with the heads of crocodiles and the bodies of hippopotami. To survive, the deceased relied on the Book of the Dead that had been buried with them. They had to recite the passwords of the gates, calling the guardian demons by their secret names to prove they were not intruders, but initiates of the light. Along the way, the soul encountered the ferryman of the dead, a grumpy deity who looked backwards as he rode. He would only take those who could answer his riddles about the parts of his boat. "What is the mast?" he would ask, and the soul had to reply, "It is the spine of Osiris." If the soul failed, it was cast into the dark waters to be forgotten. If it succeeded, it was carried across the lake of flowers toward the mountains of the sunset. The journey was also a test of Ren, the name. The soul had to remember who it was and where it came from, even as the terrors of the Duat tried to strip away its identity. It had to avoid the net of the fowlers, the traps set by the gods of chaos to catch the souls of the weak and the sinful. This was the true meaning of the mummification. The physical body in the tomb acted as an anchor, a house of the Ka, that kept the soul tethered to reality while it traveled through the dream world of the night. In the 4th hour of the night, the soul reached the land of Sokar, a place of deep sand and absolute silence. Here there were no landmarks and no stars. The traveler had to rely on the internal light of their own ma'at to find the path. It was a place of purification, where the dross of earthly desires was burned away by the heat of the spiritual desert, leaving only the essential self to continue the trek. By the 6th hour, the soul witnessed the great mystery, the meeting of Ra and Osiris. This union of the two souls provided a burst of divine energy that illuminated the entire underworld for a single moment. The traveler would bask in this light, gaining the strength needed for the final, most terrifying stages of the journey. It was a reminder that even in the heart of death, the sun was still present, and even in the darkness, the king was still on his throne. The final hours were a race against the sunrise. The soul had to pass through the caverns of the executioners, where the enemies of the gods were eternally punished. The sounds of their cries were said to be like the howling of a great wind. The traveler had to keep their eyes fixed forward, refusing to be drawn into the chaos, for the hall of the two truths was now looming on the horizon, the final destination where their entire life would be weighed. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, would meet the soul at the entrance of the hall. He did not come as an enemy, but as a pathfinder. He would take the soul by the hand and lead it through the massive doors of lapis lazuli and gold. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the presence of the 42 divine judges, each one representing a specific sin that the traveler had to deny. This was the negative confession. The soul had to stand before the judges and state, "I have not stolen, I have not told lies, I have not caused anyone to weep, I have not stopped the flow of the water." It was not enough to be mostly good. The soul had to be pure, pure, pure. Every word was recorded by Thoth, and every heartbeat was monitored by the scales that sat in the center of the room.
The center of the great hall was dominated by a massive golden scale. On one side sat a single ostrich feather, the feather of Ma'at, representing the cosmic weight of truth and order. On the other side, Anubis placed the heart of the deceased. In Egyptian belief, the heart, the Ib, was the seat of the mind, the memory, and the conscience.
It was the only part of the human being that could not lie. It held the record of every thought and action the person had ever committed. As the heart was placed on the scale, a terrifying silence fell over the hall. To the side of the scales crouched Amit, the devourer of the dead. She was a chimeric nightmare with the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. Her eyes were fixed on the heart, her jaws dripping with anticipation. If the heart was heavy with the lead of sin, if it had been hardened by cruelty, greed, or falseness, it would tip the scale, and Amit would lunge. To have one's heart eaten by Amit was the second death. It was not an eternity in a lake of fire, but something the Egyptians feared much more: non-existence. The soul would be erased from the records of time, its name forgotten, its path through the stars severed. It would be as if the person had never been born, a return to the chaotic, unformed waters of noon. This was the ultimate failure of the human journey, the victory of Apep over the individual soul. But for the justified soul, the heart remained as light as the feather. This did not mean the person was perfect, but that they had lived in harmony with the rhythm of the world. They had given bread to the hungry and water to the thirsty. Their heart was open, and therefore it had no weight. When the scales remained balanced, Thoth would dip his reed pen into his ink and record the verdict in the eternal scrolls. The deceased is found to be Ma'at Keru, true of voice. The pronouncement of true of voice was the greatest sound a soul could ever hear. It meant that the traveler had conquered death and chaos. Anubis would then step back, and Horus, the golden king of the living, would step forward. He would take the justified soul by the hand and lead them toward the throne at the far end of the hall, where the Lord of the Silence awaited his newest subject. There sat Osiris, his skin the vibrant green of the new grain, wrapped in his white mummification linens. He held the crook and the flail across his chest, and his eyes were full of a deep, welcoming peace. He was the first of the Westerners, the god who had died and risen so that all others could do the same. By standing before him, the soul was acknowledging that it was now part of the great body of Osiris, a cell in the organism of eternity. Osiris would nod his approval, and the traveler would be given a new garment of pure, shimmering white linen. They would be anointed with the oil of gladness and given a crown of flowers that would never wither. The trials of the Duat were over. The fear of Amit was gone. The soul had become an Akh, a transfigured spirit of light, capable of traveling anywhere in the universe, from the depths of the earth to the height of the sun. The gates behind the throne of Osiris would then swing open, revealing a sight that made the soul weep with joy. It was not a strange alien heaven, but a perfect, idealized version of the home they had left behind. This was the Seket Aru, the field of reeds, where the horizon was always gold and the river was always full. The justified soul would step through the gates and leave the darkness of the underworld behind forever. The transition from the scales to the field was the ultimate victory of the Egyptian spirit. It taught that justice was the foundation of the world, and that the small voice of the conscience was more powerful than the jaws of a monster. It was the promise that the golden age of Osiris was not a thing of the past, but a destination for the future, a reward for every person who chose the path of the hawk over the path of the serpent. The Hall of Truth remains the most potent image in the Egyptian mythos. It reminds us that our lives are not measured by what we gather, but by what we are. The scales are always waiting, and the feather of Ma'at is always ready. For the Egyptians, every day of life was a preparation for that moment of silence in the Great Hall, a chance to make the heart as light as air.
The Thicket Aru, or Field of Reeds, was the Egyptian paradise, located where the sun rises in the east. It was a landscape of infinite fertility and peace, a mirror of the Nile Delta, but without the scorpions, the taxes, or the toil. Here the stalks of barley grew 7 cubits high, and the ears of corn were larger than a man's hand. The water in the canals was always sweet and cool, and the breeze of Shu was a constant, gentle caress through the palm trees. In the Field of Reeds, the justified soul was reunited with all those they had loved on earth. They found their parents, their children, and their ancestors waiting for them in houses built of white stone and cedar. There was no grief in this land, for death had been conquered. The Westerners lived in a state of eternal maturity. No one was too old to walk or too young to understand. It was a society of the blessed, where every word spoken was a poem of gratitude. The soul did not sit in idle boredom. The Egyptians believed that doing was part of being. In paradise, the deceased would plow the fields and harvest the grain, but the work was a joy rather than a burden. The soil of Geb was so eager to provide that the plow moved with a touch, and the harvest was a festival of song. For those who did not wish to work, they had their ushabati, small magical servant statues buried with them, who would spring to life and say, "Here am I," whenever a task was called for. In the Field of Reeds, the gods themselves walked openly in the field. The justified soul could sit in the shade of a sycamore tree and listen to Hathor play her harp, or walk along the riverbank and talk with Thoth about the mysteries of the stars. There was no distance between the human and the divine. The great barrier that Ra had established after the rebellion of men was finally dissolved. The soul was a citizen of the cosmos, a star among stars. Every morning, the inhabitants of the field would gather at the eastern horizon to welcome the solar bark of Ra as it emerged from the Duat. They would shout with joy and clap their hands, for their energy was what helped push the sun into the sky. By night, they would board the boat and travel with Ra through the underworld, acting as their guardians and warriors, before returning to their paradise at dawn. Their existence was a vital part of the cosmic cycle. The food in paradise was the bread of eternity and the beer of everlastingness. These were not physical foods, but the essence of nourishment provided by the 7 Hathors. The soul never knew hunger or thirst, for their every desire was met before it was even whispered. They wore jewelry of lapis and turquoise that never tarnished, and robes of linen that never frayed. They were the imperishable ones, their bodies made of the same light that fueled the sun. The Field of Reeds was also a place of infinite remembrance. The soul could look back at their life on earth and see the hidden hand of Ma'at in every event. They understood why they had suffered and why they had triumphed. The great pattern of their life was finally clear, and they could see how their small story was a necessary thread in the massive tapestry of the universe. The bitterness of the past was washed away by the clarity of the present. This paradise was the ultimate goal of 3,000 years of Egyptian civilization. It was why they built the pyramids,
why they preserved their dead, and why they lived their lives by the light of the truth. It was a vision of a world where order had finally, completely triumphed over chaos, a world where the green valley had finally pushed back the red desert forever. Yet, even in the field of reeds, the soul remained connected to the living. They could travel back to earth in the form of a bird to visit their tombs, smell the incense offered by their descendants, and protect their families from misfortune. The line of the living and the line of the dead remained a single unbroken chain, a community that spanned the boundaries of time and space. As the soul looked out over the golden fields, they realized that they were home. The long journey from the waters of Nun, through the struggles of Horus and Set, and past the scales of judgment, had led to this moment of absolute stillness. The good being Osiris had provided a kingdom that would never end, a testament to the belief that life is not a brief spark in the dark, but an eternal fire that only grows brighter with every dawn.
The mythology of Egypt does not end with a final battle or a world consumed by fire. Instead, it concludes with the image of the Ouroboros, the serpent that bites its own tail, representing the eternal cycle of the universe. The Egyptians knew that for every sunset there is a sunrise, for every flood there is a harvest, and for every death there is a rebirth. The story of the gods is not a line, but a circle that began in the first time and continues into the forever. Maat, the divine order, is the force that keeps this circle turning. As long as there is a pharaoh on the throne, or a heart that follows the truth, the sun will rise and the Nile will flow. The battle against Apep is fought every night, and the victory of Horus is won every day. The universe is a living organism that must be maintained by the active participation of both gods and men. This is the great responsibility of the Egyptian soul. The primordial waters of Nun still surround the world, pressing against the sky and the earth. Chaos is not defeated, but contained. It is the dark backdrop that makes the light of the sun possible. The Egyptians understood that without the desert of Set, the valley of Horus would have no meaning. The tension between the two is what creates the energy of existence. To be alive is to stand in the middle of this divine friction and find one's balance. The gods did not leave the world, they simply became hidden. They are the hidden names within the wind, the water, and the stone. When a person acts with justice, they are the hands of Horus. When a person speaks with wisdom, they are the tongue of Thoth. When a person loves with devotion, they are the heart of Isis. The mythology is not a history of the past, but a manual for the present, a way to live so that the divine is manifested in every action. The great cycle ensures that nothing is ever lost. The grain that dies in the earth is the same grain that rises as Osiris in the spring. The sun that sets as an old man is the same sun that rises as a child. This belief gave the Egyptians a profound sense of security and a lack of fear. They did not fear time, for time was their friend. They did not fear the end, for there was no end. They were the people of the infinity, building for a future that they knew they would inhabit. As the millennia passed and the temples eventually fell into ruin, the soul of Egypt did not vanish. The hieroglyphs were silenced for a time, but the truths they contained remained carved into the collective consciousness of humanity.
The ideas of the soul's judgment, the resurrection of the dead, and the battle between light and darkness moved into other cultures and other faiths, becoming the foundational myths of the modern world. Today, when we look at the pyramids or the golden mask of a king, we are seeing the remnants of a civilization that tried to capture eternity in stone. They were the first to say that a human life is sacred and that a human heart is the measure of the universe. Their story is a reminder that we are all travelers in the Duat and that we all carry a spark of Atum within us, waiting to be ignited by the light of Mat. The 30 chapters of this chronicle are merely one turn of the wheel. The story is being written again in every sunrise and every heartbeat. The good being Osiris still sits on his throne. Horus still guards the living, and Isis still weaves her magic to protect the world. The first time is happening right now, in the moment you choose to seek the truth. The silence of Nun has been broken by the word of the Creator, and that word still echoes through the stars. The coming forth by day is the promise given to every soul that seeks to be true of voice. And so the sunboat sails on, past the serpent and toward the morning, carrying the hopes of millions of years into a future that is as bright as the face of the sun. The end of the story is the beginning of the mystery. The great green of the afterlife is waiting, and the scales are balanced. As the ancient scribes used to write at the conclusion of their scrolls, "It is finished in peace." But in the land of the Nile, finished simply means that the circle is complete, and it is time for the journey to begin once again.